All right, thank you. Now, do we have any requests to address the board for non-agenda, non-action items? All right. Moving on, then we have the start of school update. Turn it over to Dr. Ouellette.
Yeah, just a couple things wanted to touch on, and we talked about this a little bit at our I guess we haven't had a meeting since we've started school. It's been a real positive start to the year. We had to run our staff back to school, get together a little bit different than we've done in the past. We did them by building. We did them in larger spaces and tried to keep people spread out. A couple things that I think people had concerns about as it related to masks and as it related to some of those different pieces, social distancing. And this kind of flows into the COVID operational update, but the masks, knock on wood, have been, the kids have been really, really cooperative on the mask, and that's been very, very helpful as we've started the year. We are 9 days in, as of today, knock on wood, and we continue to go. Our next major data point is coming up on Wednesday. The 16th is when we make a decision for the next 2 weeks. And again, we are reviewing the data every day. We're looking at the county data every day. It's not that we just kind of stick our head in the sand and wait till next Wednesday. I mean, we're tracking it, looking at trends. It's just we wanted parents to know that on those 2-week periods, they can look for that email from us so they don't feel like they need to be checking every single day that it might change that day. Because if it does need to change, it's usually because of something that's a much larger situation, and we can adjust and work through that. As we continue to kind of work through the year, staffing-wise, teaching staffing-wise, we're staffed. We do have some open positions still in our school-age care ranks and also in our paraprofessional ranks and some custodial ranks, some food service ranks. So some of our hourly staffs are still, we still have some open positions, but for the most part, things are motoring along. I would say that as you think about the start of the year, I've been in a lot of classrooms, talked to a lot of staff. I think people are excited to be back. They're happy to be back. However, there's a high level of stress right now with staff, which we knew was going to be the case. And we're going to talk about in the COVID-19 operational update some of the things that we're going to be doing to try. Dave's going to talk about what we're going to try to do to address some of those concerns and what we're doing as we work through it. But I would say overall, it's been a great start to the year. We've been extremely just proud of, like I said, the way the community's come together, the way the kids have come together. Feel really good about the fact that we're 9 days in, and hopefully we're anticipating being able to continue to stay moving forward. We have had a couple positive cases, and we did send out communication on Sunday. We had a positive case at Hudson Prairie. We did send out a communication also today. We had a positive case at the high school. And so I just want to remind people that we've never once promised that we would not have any positive cases. It's just that we continue to deal with them and work through those challenges. And so we've been working closely with public health and our school nurses on that. And I can tell you that I just had a conversation today with public health, their lead official, and she's been extremely happy with the way we've been able to provide data for them as they think about close contacts and quarantining, and then also our mitigation methods. I would say that we are implementing about as tight of mitigation methods as any place in the county, and so we feel really, really good about that, and we're hoping that we'll be able to continue to keep open because of it. So with that, any questions about the start of the school year? Okay, which kind of leads into the next piece, which is the COVID update or operational update. And as I talked about, we've used the positive case protocols that we had spelled out for everybody. And, I had talked to the principal over at Hudson Prairie today. I said, did we get a lot of emails, a lot of calls? Because we sent out the very first communication was on Sunday. He said it's actually been very positive. Parents have been very good. We did have kids that were considered close contacts and had to quarantine, but overall, parents have been very positive. I think everybody's just kind of nervous as we have these cases. What does that mean, and who does that entail? Andrea and her team are definitely working through, as it relates to staff-related issues to COVID and things along those lines, but we're in a pretty good spot. I wanted to have Dave kind of talk a little bit about how we're going to provide some additional support at the elementary level to kind of ease some of the stress that's going on.
Yep, thank you very much. So as Nick said, at the elementary level, the individual distance learning is very challenging. I think more so than at the other levels, primarily because of just the age of the kids. Kids at the secondary level are much more independent, so the idea of individual distance learning seems to work a little bit more smoothly, especially at the beginning. The overwhelming response we get from teachers at all levels when we talk about how it's going is, it's really hard, but it's getting better. That's sort of the message we get over and over again. Having said that, the challenges at the elementary level are pretty significant, and they're further exacerbated by the fact that we are implementing a new curricular resource, the Fontes Pinnell Classroom, which is a fantastic support, and I think most teachers recognize it as a support because it provides structure to literacy, which is the bulk of the elementary day. But having said that, it's still a lot to implement, and it's a material-heavy curricular resource. It requires a lot of work, and that is a bit overwhelming for our elementary teachers as well. So our plan is, and this plan was developed, Nick, Andrea, Lisa Scoyen, myself started just brainstorming, and then has been further refined by bringing in a few other experts that know how we could operationalize this plan. But it involves hiring 3 clerical assistants, administrative assistants, level 3, to work in the 6 buildings. So essentially, it would equate to, on average, about a half a day per grade level team per building over the course of a week. We distribute them and their hours based on need at the building, which would be determined by the number of individual distance learners, because that is really what we're trying to support here. Yes, the curricular resource adds a level of complexity, but it's really about the individual distance learning and the support for the teachers that way. If you picture the way the individual distance learning works, there's a lot of material that has to go back and forth between the schools and home, quite a bit more than the secondary level, because it's easier to translate materials electronically at the secondary level. There are certain things that just don't translate well to an electronic platform at the elementary level. So the purpose of this position then would be to support the teachers by gathering and disseminating, organizing this material, making sure it gets back and forth comfortably between home and school so the teachers can just focus on instruction. It's not a paraprofessional position where they'd be providing support directly to students. It's support for the teachers on those managerial duties. This is one of the things that we heard loud and clear, and I think Lisa Scoyen was the one that really brought the issue to the forefront by explaining really specifically the feedback she was getting, and this was a design to directly address that feedback. We've talked to principals today, worked through some of the logistics. Amy Wise, our elementary curriculum specialist, would be overseeing the work that these individuals would do to make sure that it's very focused and supporting primarily the individual distance learners. So, questions on that?
Rob?
So Dave, just to confirm, these are new positions?
Yes. These are
And
new
what is
positions.
the financial impact of these ads? Do you have an idea?
Nick, do you remember the...
Yeah, I mean, we're probably less than $75,000 all in
In total?
And Tim can run the exact numbers, but I mean, it's really, because these aren't going to start just yet, but we have some things in place, and really it's what are some of the things we can take off of people's plates that are time consuming but aren't real, high yield, type of things that really it takes a certified teacher to do, and so that's where this came into play. So. It's one of those things where I did give them the go ahead and start heading down this path. I know it's just time is of the essence on some of the stuff, and we know that staff are really wanting to see us implement these things. And we're also going to be doing something. Maybe Dave's going to talk about it with the subs to kind of get immediate relief for our teaching staff until we can get these individuals up and running. And these would be 1-year positions, so these would not be an ongoing. These would be 1-year positions. Is that right? Is that kind of how we would set it up, Andrew? Is that right? So
Yeah.
Dave would kind of talk about what would be our immediate steps, because there is a little bit of a gap between when you advertise, interview, and hire, And we know that teachers have immediate needs right now.
Yeah, so thank you for that. And Andrea and I have been talking quite a bit about feedback we're getting from principals saying it would be great if we could do whatever we can do to support substitutes in helping them become comfortable coming into the school. So we put together some advanced training. We've had about 40 subs that came into the building. Very rewarding to see a lot of recent retired teachers come in for that sub training. That was wonderful. They're sort of our bread and butter, and they're very valuable to us. So having them come in was fantastic. But one of the things they expressed and the principals have been hearing is it would be great if we could have subs shadow in the classrooms to get a sense for what this whole individual distance learning environment looks like. Because if you remember, I mean, the individual distance learning is one thing, but obviously it's happening concurrently with in-person learning. So we can talk about it, we can describe it, we can even do some videos, but that's not the same as being able to shadow and see a teacher in action. So the plan would be in between the posting and the filling, which probably about 2 weeks by the time we'd get some people to fill this permanent position or the year-long position, bringing in subs to spend half their day shadowing in the classroom, the other half of the day fulfilling some of these responsibilities that we described that the clerical assistants would be doing. What this would do, it's twofold. One, it brings, as Nick said, immediate relief to teachers. Secondly, it increases the likelihood that we're going to be able to keep our classroom staffed with subs when that need arises.
Sue, did you have a question?
Carrie, okay. I was just going to say, Nick, I am having a hard time understanding you, just for going forward.
You're having a hard time understanding me?
Yeah. And
Okay.
I am too, just a smidge.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I think maybe what we might have to do is we might have to take the mask off when we talk, just slide it down
Way
and then
better.
put it back up. Because
But you can understand me.
Yeah, but you're,
Thank you.
You're projecting to us, though?
I don't think that's it, but yeah, that's fine.
All right, Sue?
Okay. What are you hearing, or what kind of reports are coming from principals or teachers about having to have enough time with distance learning to call back or have computer interaction or to get back to their students on a personal basis?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, Sue. That is one of the primary concerns with individual distance learning, especially for those that have multiple kids that have selected individual distance learning. If you picture the way this works, now if you just have one individual distance learner, your instructional delivery model is still completely different. It's no different than having 2 or 3 or 4, but what you just described is the difference. It's the connections with those students, where if you have one, it's easier to carve some time out to be able to address those needs. And part of the design, which I think is a good design where the individual distance learning occurs with that classroom teacher, it can create some inequities because there's a bit of chance that's involved. We do have some teachers that have 0 individual distance learners. We have some that have 3 or 4. The most I've heard, I think, was 7, and that's quite a bit. Quite a discrepancy, obviously, between 7 and 0. So the idea with this plan is those teachers that are burdened with quite a few individual distance learners would get more of that support in order to try to take something off their plate. We even talked about there's some other support we might be able to do where if we bring a substitute into a classroom and allow that substitute to take the lead with the in-person learners, so the classroom teacher would have more time during the instructional day, not separate time outside of the instructional day, but during that time to build that rapport and relationships. Because, and especially at the elementary level, it is, well, I shouldn't say that's really at all levels. It's so critical to have those strong relationships, and it's very deliberate at the elementary level, the way those relationships are formed. When you upend everything in this environment, those typical protocols and practices that are in place to build relationships are strained, and so that is an area that we need to support.
Any other questions from board members on the COVID update?
Mr. President.
Yes.
David, could you speak a little bit about IT and support for the teachers in elementary as far as parents having problems? Are these teachers? Do they have a resource with the district for that? Do we have enough people in that position?
Great question. Our IT department has done outstanding work supporting families. So we've reversed things a little bit. Typically, the IT department is directly supporting staff members, teachers, assistants, different departments, and so forth. We have a help desk ticket system directly for parents and families. So if they have an issue and it's linked in all of their Google Classrooms, they click on it, and Jen Lotzi prides herself on being responsive, does an amazing job having a really quick response time. Having said that, they are running themselves ragged. They're working really hard to be that responsive. So it's not that it's easy, it's not that it's not taxing what they're able to do, but they're doing a great job of being responsive. Now, if you picture this, what we've really done is we've taken our IT department that supported 5,600 students and 400 certified staff and a lot of support staff. And now we're saying, and you're supporting all these families. And the support of the families is extremely challenging because they're not using necessarily our equipment, our system. So you can't just log on and see, what's going on, how can we help? It creates another level of complexity. Again, they're doing a fantastic job, but yeah, it's they're running themselves ragged and they're definitely taxed.
Other questions?
Mr. President,
Bruce?
just a comment more than anything. I can only imagine how difficult it has been and will continue to be. I think the entire year is probably going to be challenging for our staff and for our administration. This isn't an easy time for any of us. I did have a teacher over at our house briefly over the weekend from a neighboring school district, and they're not doing schooling the same way that we are, and their comment was, why can't we be doing it like Hudson is doing it, because it would seem to be easier. And I don't know that anything's easy for any of our staff at this time, whether it's here or any other. There's probably pros and cons on both sides for our staff. So appreciate you continuing to look for ways to make it easier, to make it a little bit better, or at least as good as it can be. So thank you for that. Maybe I missed it, Nick, but just curious on the staffing for busing. I think there was a couple instances there. How does Safeway feel about their pool of resources for busing and the ability to keep us up and running there?
I can have Andrew address that.
Well, I think at this time they are maintaining their staffing, but certainly a concern. We're actually meeting tomorrow to talk more specifically. Well, what if we have some positive cases? I think with respect to the bus drivers themselves too, and it's unlikely that we'll have close contacts associated with positive bus driver cases because of the distance between the drivers and the students. But we will certainly have positive bus drivers during the course of the year, and
Sure.
so we'll want to make sure that we're supportive there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just close with saying thank you, to all the staff and the administration, support staff, everyone that's helping kick the year off. It's so great to have kids back in school. So just heartwarm welcome and thank you to all of those that are out there doing their job every day. Thanks.
And just to follow up, and I know, Bob, you have a question, but with IDL, I know some people, there's a rumor out there that we're purposely trying to make IDL difficult in an effort to bring kids back, and that's just not the case. We are trying to do everything we can to make this a positive experience, both for kids at home, for our staff at school. Do we prefer kids to be at school? Absolutely. We think that, if we didn't think face-to-face learning was important, we wouldn't have rolled out a model that had us going 5 days a week face-to-face learning. We do feel it's very important. However, I can tell you, as Dave alluded to, both our teachers, our tech team, our administrative team, everybody is trying to do everything they can to make this go as smoothly as possible. But anytime you roll out something this complex, you're going to have hiccups, you're going to have bumps in the road, and I just want to make sure people understand that we are trying to do everything we possibly can to make it as smooth as possible. Bob?
Oh, I just wanted to comment or a question, actually. So what we're doing with the extra hires, that's to be used for basically prep time for teachers and to ease some of that?
Yeah, it's the material handling and the sharing of materials back and forth between individual distance learners and home.
And that has nothing to do with the with our sub program as far as having like extra.
No,
subs.
so I mean, like Dave said, what it's designed to do is right now teachers are having to chew up their own prep time, or they're having to chew up additional time outside of the day to meet these needs. And so the thought process, it doesn't necessarily give teachers more time per se, but it allows them to use their time in different ways by taking these things off the plate. I mean, we're constantly trying to look at that. I know sometimes people may not think that, but we are trying to look and see, you know, how can we pull things off people's plates, and what does that look like? And so that's really the way this is set up, to give us the largest bang across the district, so that it impact all elementary teams across the district.
Thank you.
We should probably mention, too, that we have added some support at the secondary level. It's just handled differently. So extending some hours, offering additional hours to the folks that handle the daily individual distance learning work. So actually right where we're sitting here, they have boxes that are lined up all through here that each student that signed up for individual distance learning, they have a box and the material goes in and out. And a lot of people work to make that successful. So we've authorized some hours to ease that burden a bit.
Heather?
So as someone who's relatively recently had kids in our elementary schools, I know what a strong supportive presence volunteers have played in those schools. And if I'm remembering correctly, that's different this year, right? I've had several folks in the community throughout the summer and coming to the fall talk about kind of what can I do. Is there any way, and have we talked about the possibility of bringing limited numbers of volunteers into the schools to provide some additional support for teachers? I don't believe we've talked specifically about the volunteer piece, but we did view, and we want to craft these 3 positions as certainly a viable option for parents who want to go to that level. Like, we're going to post it by building so that if they want to have that presence in their children's buildings, it may be a really good opportunity to work during the school day. But I think volunteers, we've been holding off on that primarily because of the exposures.
One of the things that's our biggest challenge, obviously, is we have to know who's in the buildings, when they're in the buildings, and then it has to tie back to when we do have positive cases, because we have to do the contact tracing as it relates to it. And so it's not that we can't revisit volunteers potentially down the road, and I think we even have it in our plan to revisit, but it may be for providing some additional support in classrooms and things like that. But it's going to be where we need kind of consistency, so that we know that on Tuesdays Dave's always in this classroom, so that if we do happen to have a positive case in whatever classroom it is, and it happens to be one that Dave's in, we can give that as a close contact name, or a person that would be in there, and they'd make the determination. And so that's where right now we just don't have a plan as to how we could do that. It would have to be somebody that's willing to be really regular, and we haven't gotten that far along in that discussion. Not saying that it couldn't happen, but right now that hasn't been the focus. And then the last piece related, did you have something? The last piece I wanted to touch on, Tracy's actually going to touch on, is we're looking to get back to some level of normalcy, and as it looks at utilizing our facilities at night and renting our facilities. And Tracy's going to kind of talk a little bit about where we're sitting with that.
Certainly. So we are.
Nope. Oh.
Does? Okay. So we're looking at opening up our facilities again for rentals, but we don't want to just open it wide up. So our focus right now is going to be with our priority 2 users, which are primarily our kids. So it would be like our HBA groups, MACO, so the youth activity groups that we would be focusing on for rentals. We're going to align with our athletics department, so as far as determining how many people we can support in a gym and all that, it will be the same as what we've got going in athletics. So just to take away any confusion, so aligning those 2. I met with Aaron last week and again today just to go over that so that we are on board, and then we'll continue to set up the contracts with those outside users, making sure that they're collecting rosters and following all of our protocols when they are using our spaces.
One of the major things is obviously taking attendance, so we know who is in the buildings at what time. Again, it goes back to contact tracing. But as Trace said, it's going to be limited to those tier 2 groups. So we're still, the only type of adult use we would really have is tied back to our community ed, but, we wouldn't have, let's say there's a AAU basketball team from somewhere, let's say Woodbury that wants to rent our facility. We would say, no, you can't do that if it's not 80% our kids. And so really what it is we do have our community group saying, hey, if these kids are together during the day, are we able to start utilizing your facilities in the evening? And so, and I think most of the athletic stuff aligns with how they would normally use it anyway. But the big pieces are just making sure that we can know who's here, they're following the masking rules and things like that. And we always have the ability, it's kind of like with anything, we always have the ability, if we start to have some issues, we can always tighten things back up and trying to see, we're just kind of dipping our toe at different times and trying to see how we're sitting. And there is no perfect solution on any one of these things. So trying to give a little bit, see how it goes, and then kind of go back and forth as we work through it. So that's kind of our plan of attack as we work through it.
Mr. President.
Yes, Rob.
So how we provide oversight for our teachers is likely different this year. Do we have an idea how we're going to help them in their reviews if we're not going to be in the classroom, or how are we going to provide that oversight so we can provide a proper review?
Well, and Dave can address educator effectiveness, but really our administrators are in the classrooms. They're doing observations. Actually, I just had a meeting this afternoon with one of our principals. He said, I've already done 11 informal observations this year in classrooms. And so, and principals are professionals. They understand that, there's a level of grace that goes with teaching something like IDL related. I mean, it's not going to be, as good as if they'd been doing it for 20 years, and I think that's the big stressor right now is, we've talked about it as it relates to IDL. IDL's not going as well as people would like, but better than they thought it would, kind of thing, where people would like it to be much better, top of the game, but it's maybe not quite as bad as they anticipated. And so it's kind of the same thing with the administrators as they go into these different rooms, is they take that in consideration. They know this is brand new to everybody, so trying to take that in consideration. Now, Dave, if you want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with educator effectiveness.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. So last year, the way the year ended, we were really wrestling with that question because suddenly we're closed and we had evaluations to finish up. The state provided some flexibility that allowed us to extend those into this year. So the principal that Nick is talking about, and a lot of principals had to finish up actually last year's process. So a lot of the observations that are happening now are actually finishing up last year's cycle. But as Nick said, for the most part, the educator effectiveness system will run as planned, with the big operative word that Nick mentioned as well is grace. So if you think about educator effectiveness and the power of an observation, the least important part of that is the evaluation. The most important part is the feedback. And this time more than ever, it helps to have another body in the room just to take an objective look at what's going and find opportunities to provide feedback like they've never received before, because every teacher, as seasoned and skilled as they might be, feels like a brand new teacher this year. So having someone else be able to walk in, so we don't want to shy away from that process. We want to lean in and be part of that process, offer the feedback, and make sure that it is completely from a supportive lens, as it should be.
Further questions, comments? All right. I just want to, thanks for the report, Nick. Also, Nick, thanks for your outstanding updates throughout the day of that first day of school, giving the board updates multiple times during the day as far as how the start of school was going. And it's been, today we finished our 9th day of actual in-person learning, so we got 9 behind us anyway. I have heard the vast majority have been extremely positive, and I got one today briefly to share. Was a parent who the kids, I'm not going to point out the school because I don't want to, push one school over another, but it's probably indicative of all of our schools. And he personally thought that each year he thinks that the kids have the best teacher they've ever had, and this year is no exception. And how outstanding the teachers are coming through on all of these points, and in the case of the one teacher, sending 2 emails a day for the last 2 weeks, giving updates to parents about what's going on in the classroom and how their student is doing. So I think that kudos to everyone. I know this is a stressful time, but really appreciate the reaction and the follow-through effort that everyone's given. Well, let's move on to the annual Seclusion and Restraint report. Erin?
Yep, so this is can you hear me? Is that on? Okay. Annual Seclusion and Restraint report. So in each building, a crisis team of administrators, teachers, and support staff, as well as staff who work in special education, are trained in annual crisis prevention and intervention through our in-district trainers. The main focus, and will continue to be a renewed focus this year, is how to effectively use those de-escalation strategies so that we can decrease the need for seclusion and restraint. We really do want to focus on empowering more staff to have those de-escalation strategies so that we can decrease the need and increase our student connection to school as well. So during the 2019-20 school year, we did experience an increase in the need and use of seclusion and physical restraint, particularly at our elementary level. This was due significantly to a few students who required high level of behavior support and programming and lots of problem solving around what particular program these students require. So we'll be focusing a lot of our work again this year and continue to support our students and increase their positive interactions with staff and students at school. So included in the report, you'll find the state required data regarding number of incidents in the school district. Also included is some demographic information. And although this data is required for us to report, it's really important that we use this as a reflective tool within our programming as well. So really, a few recommendations as we go forward into this year is increased focus training in really quality behavior assessments and behavior intervention plans, focusing specifically on proactive strategies, including trauma-informed care. And so this is really a focus for our school psychologist team as well as our building mental health teams. And so to kind of braid those 2 programs together, that will help support this work. Another thing that we are going to implement this year is mandatory IEP or parent meeting after the second incident within a school year to discuss additional positive interventions and proactive strategies to avoid future incidents and also help us continue to foster positive relationships and a culture of support with families. And then, as I mentioned previously, continue that training in the de-escalation strategies for staff.
Questions for Erin?
Mr. President.
Okay.
Oh.
Rob?
No, go ahead.
Aaron, do you expect the levels that we saw last year to continue?
You know, it's really hard to say. I think that we've done an incredible amount of work in terms of appropriate programming and increasing our positive, proactive strategies. So I'm really, I really do think we'll see a decrease this year.
And these numbers are only through March?
Correct.
All right. Sue?
I'm just going to say I had occasion to observe a principal and staff from the media center have to do a restraint and lower a child to the floor. And I was actually working with another student, but I was really impressed at the carefulness and the kindness, but they all knew what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And after a few minutes, they checked with the child, and the child was ready to get up. And
Yep.
Anyway, I had firsthand observations, so
Yep.
I think the training must be very good.
Yeah, our trainers are excellent. And, just as a reminder, seclusion and restraint is only used in emergency situations. So when there's an imminent threat of safety to staff or peers is only when that is used. So, thank you.
Bruce, did you have
President?
some?
Yeah. And I'm not sure, are like paras often involved in this?
Yes, many of our special ed paras are trained in, yep.
So, I saw that we had openings where we were trying to hire more people there. So just a couple of questions on that. I can imagine that's a very difficult job.
Yeah.
And I see our pay there as well, and I don't know how, I'm sure we look at where that ranks. I know we've done some things for that pay grade for subs during the COVID times. Is that another area where we may need to explore that if we're falling short there? So that's question number one. And then question number two, how often do those jobs turn over? And is it a lot of training that seems like it's, something that would be a pretty large task, just on the ongoing training, whereas if we can retain those individuals, would that be something also we'd want to look at from a compensation perspective? So just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I can speak to the importance of having trained paraprofessionals in our special ed programming. Our special ed programming doesn't work without them. In supporting students in the classroom, we can't get to the level of inclusive practices that we want to get to without them. And, conversations that we have frequently at Cabinet, just in how to recruit, retain, and make sure that people know how valued they are.
And I would say that, was it 2 years ago, we differentiated between the regular ed para and the special ed para by adding $1 an hour to the special ed para rate. We've had much discussion, and I'm sure as part of our proposal that we'll be giving next month for wages going into this year, I know we've had a lot of discussion regarding further differentiation to one-to-one paras. So those paras and programs being able to compensate them at additional level.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to the curriculum improvement process. And Dave?
Thank you very much. So every year we bring to you an update on our curriculum improvement process, primarily to set the stage for the series of presentations you'll be receiving from our assistant directors at all levels, or the assistant directors and the curriculum specialists at all levels, when they run through and update you on the various curricular areas. The curriculum improvement process is one of the most important processes we have in place in teaching and learning, because all of the work we do related to curriculum, instruction, assessment is all driven by this process. So it's a 6-phase process, and it's based on the concept of understanding by design, operative word being understanding. It is all about gaining student understanding through a very thoughtful and deliberate process. Understanding by design is essentially made up of 3 phases. We then adjust that to a 6-phase process that allows us to sort of track our improvement process through 6 years, which is about what we budget for new resources. So that drives the 6 phases that we have. The first 3 are all about development, and then the last 3 phases are about reflection, revision, and adjustments. When we break down these phases, it's important to understand one of the concepts or the key tenets to understanding by design is the idea of backwards design. And sometimes that's what people refer to this process as backwards design. What we mean by backwards design is we start with the end in mind. It's very typical, and most of us that were trained as educators, when we went through our undergraduate work, you learned a lot about lesson planning. You learned a lot about planning experiences. And quite honestly, it's what motivated most of us. I know when I was a new teacher, what I was most excited about was planning engaging experiences. I wasn't necessarily driven by the assessment or the outcomes. That limited my impact as a teacher. Now, taking a step back, I understand that, and I think teachers going through their training now understand that much better than I did, because this is now sort of the gold standard for curriculum improvement. So the first phase is all about identifying desired results. When we talk about desired results, we're talking about enduring understandings. The way I would describe an enduring understanding, it's that thing that you talk about now as an adult, like remember that class we had in high school? Remember that big concept we explored? Something that sticks with you long term. That's an enduring understanding. An essential question is the next level, also identified in stage 1. The essential questions would be those things that you want a student to be able to answer at the end of the course. So the summer after, you'd ask a question, you want them to be able to answer those essential questions. There should only be a few per course. And then we get into the standards and the prioritization of standards. And we talk about that quite a bit, how important it is to accurately prioritize standards. That entire process is led by curriculum specialists and teachers, teams of teachers that work through this process. None of this happens without teacher leadership. It's embedded in each and every one of the steps. When we get to phase 2, this is the assessment phase. This is where we determine the assessment evidence that allows us to say, yes, we know that a student knows or is able to do whatever it is that that standard would call for. This is probably the most challenging of the phases. I presented last September. We've made some significant changes to this phase based on the feedback of the curriculum specialists and the teachers. And here's what it boiled down to. A lot of the curricular resources we ultimately select have assessment resources associated with them, and they're often really good. So what happens, sometimes we go through this process of developing assessments, and then we select the resource, and we sort of undo what we did. So what we're really looking at here in this phase is identifying clearly what success looks like. Not necessarily the tool we'll use, not necessarily the test or assessment we'll use, but we identify what success looks like. That's critical. When we have that, we know we're ready to go to the next phase. The next phase is the one that we, I think, most often associate with curriculum improvement, and this is where we develop learning experiences. Also, an absolutely essential, important, and in many ways the most rewarding of the processes, or the phases, because we go through all of that big thinking about the outcomes in the assessment, and then we finally get to say, and here's what it will look like when I'm in the classroom teaching, and that's what I think really motivates teachers. So we plan those learning experiences and the instruction. One thing I wanted to call out there, we've had a lot of conversations about multicultural education, diversity, and inclusion. This is the phase where we would most directly address that. And what we're doing is deliberately adding a lens where we're taking a look at the different aspects of the curriculum or the resources we'd select and taking an equity lens to that approach. So we've officially adopted that into our curriculum improvement process. We did some work last spring and then into the summer. We still now need to work through those individual, they're sort of mini protocols. This is the big process, but within this process, there is literally dozens of sub-processes that need to be carried out to ultimately create the best and most robust curriculum for all of our students. So that happens right there in phase 3. When we move on to the next 3 phases, they're really all about implementing, reflecting, and revising. So in the past, this wasn't considered part of the curriculum improvement process because we've selected the resource, we've created the lessons, we've created the units, and it's sort of hands off, and now we'll let that sit and just we'll catch back up in a couple years. But what we've come to realize, it's critical that we do annually reflect and revise. This is another place where teacher voice becomes critical because they're the ones that are living the curriculum. They're the ones that are delivering it on a daily basis. So they're the ones that can provide input to say, you know what, I know this is what we're looking at and what we thought we'd be able to accomplish, but I think if we make this slight adjustment, we'll have better results with our students. That happens in this process. Every single one of our content areas at every level is someplace on this process. There's never a pause. It's a continual process that goes on and is intended to, it's very much modeled after the plan, do, study, act sort of idea, where you do some planning, but then it's time to get going and then look at what those results are and make the minor adjustments. I want to make clear that in those last 3 phases, these aren't wholesale changes to everything that we planned. They're minor adjustments based on the feedback. So throughout the year, we'll be bringing, again, a series of different curricular areas to you. We plan on emphasizing the process this year. We want to make sure that when we're presenting, you as board members in the community get a strong understanding of how we're applying the logic of each one of these phases to make sure that at the end of the day, we have the best possible curriculum and instructional plan that we can for our kids. Any questions?
Any questions of board members? I haven't seen anybody snap up their hand, but just one, I guess, you described this as a continual process. So just taking one area where we've recently received requests for review would be in our, curriculum relating to racial history and equity issues and so forth. So if we were to do a review of that, and how long practically would it take to revise?
That's a really good question because there's not a clear answer. I think there's a door open somewhere. The issue of racial equity would touch many different curricular areas, not just one. It's going to be heavily involved in social studies, obviously, very much in English language arts, in the literature that we choose and we select, but it's going to touch every single area. Even something like math that you don't think about, there are sample problems in math, there are different scenarios, and we need to recognize that we can't always have a white lens to that, to the selection of the names and the scenarios. And then when we talk about our assessment, we need to make sure that there isn't racial bias embedded in the assessment questions that would create an undue burden for any student that may not have what we would consider the upbringing of the majority in our community. So it's, again, an ongoing process. I would say that there are times, and this might very well be one, where we need to do more of an audit of the curriculum, where we dig in and look at the existing practices as opposed to just let the process carry out, where we can dig in and then essentially set ourselves up so when we get to that place in the process, we're ready to adjust and make those adjustments that would be necessary.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions, follow-up of that?
Mr. President?
Yes.
Just quickly, is there currently a way that, I appreciate that teachers are heavily involved throughout this process, including that phase 3 where you said a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion issues might be addressed. Are there ways that community members currently plug into the curricular process, or how do people best share feedback or influence kind of curricular decisions?
Yeah, and also an excellent question. It's something we've recognized as a deficit in our process. We'll be developing what I would say a generic survey. When I say generic, that would be applicable to all curricular areas, that at a certain point in this process would go out and we'd seek feedback from all families as they're experiencing it. The other place where we can get feedback is through our Teaching Learning Advisory Council, and I'll just put a plug in. We have open spots. We'd love to have more people apply to be part of that Teaching and Learning Advisory Council. We can make sure I can talk to Tracy and get that out to get more voices involved in that process too, because that's a very proactive and responsive avenue to have voices heard, and we'd love to have we'd love to make sure that we are not essentially pigeonholing ourselves to a certain perspective through that process as well.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, then moving on to the action items in our agenda, and just a reminder, board members will be adjourning in 25 minutes. So we have, first up is the consent agenda items.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I move approval of the consent items and that the Chief Financial and Operations Officer be authorized to pay bills in the amount of $1,429,221.07.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Heather. All those in favor of approving all consent agenda items 1 through 5, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? The items pass. Next up is preliminary 2021 budget, which I will add has been a discussion at the last 8 or 9 board meetings. Tim, I guess this is, and it'll still be further updated, I guess, before our final approval of the levy, but why don't you give us any kind of update?
Sure. Yeah, you guys are probably getting tired of looking at this, but it does continue to be a work in progress until we get to the DPI when they get the final numbers to us in mid-October. If we look at the major assumptions for the budget, those really haven't changed much. Structurally, we continue to kind of have that decrease in state aid overall. There is a situation, which I mentioned before, where it's possible that we could see a bump up in state aid this year, and really due to the underspend that we had in 1920. But there's, the state has to determine that. It's all based on statewide information, how all the other 424 districts have spent or underspent. So we're not going to know what that number could be until we get to the final number in October from the state. But that's really a footnote at this point. We look at the estimated mill rate. That's down 3.5% in this budget, and we still continue to outpace the state in valuation. So we're at 7.2% increase in property valuations. The state was at 5.5% on average statewide. That also is kind of a double-edged sword because it does tend to drive up our negative tertiary aid. That's when our aid gets redistributed. Some of our aid gets redistributed to other districts. So that tends to be a challenge. The under levy is about just under $3.5 million, or just under $3.3 million. And again, that's direct property tax relief to property owners. If you approve that budget, that's $3.3 million that will not be levied on property owners. This assumes a 1% board-approved increase to wages and salaries, and also includes performance pay structures. We have a levy for $225,000 for community services, and that's really to recoup some of those COVID-19 losses that we sustained. And just a footnote on that one, about 72% of school districts do have a community service levy. This would be our first one, really. When you look at this version of the budget, it also includes about a little under $1.9 million for COVID-related expenses, and you can see the list there. I won't go through that, but when you look at that and look at our total bottom line of expenditures, if we take that out, we're at about 1/3% increase in expenses. So we're just about flat without the COVID related expenses. So I think that's a pretty telling story. If we move on to the budget summary, again, I won't go into a lot of detail because you've seen a lot of these numbers before and they haven't changed in a major way, but our revenues are up about 0.5%. Property taxes for the general fund are at 3.3%. And then you can see the equalization aid, which is at line 621. That's down 4.1%. So again, that's that structural funding. We used to pretty much be a 50-50 district, so funding was 50% levy and 50% state aid, but that is flipped. So if we get down to the bottom, as I mentioned, expenditures are about 3%, but if you take out those COVID-related items, we're at about 1/3% increase in those expenditures. If you look at that bottom section, general fund surplus, and you look under 1920, you can see that the estimated budget to actual variance was very high this year, so $5.1 million, and that was due to being shut down in mid-March. And so that's possibly going to have an impact on our state aid for this year. We also have, in this budget, we've got, for 2021, we've got a deficit budget of about $1 million. So we'd plan to take that $1 million out of fund balance. And this would leave us with the 5.1, or actually 5.8 going in, and reduce it by about $1 million. So when we look at what's happening around us right now, there's a possibility there could be a budget repair bill that might affect this year's budget, actually. Maybe a little less likely because the state tax revenues have come in better than they expected. So that's probably less of a possibility. But when we look at the next biennium, the 21-23 biennium, there's a strong possibility we could be cut in one or both years. We just, there's just so many unanswered questions around this. But when you look at some of the economic data, we've had the CARES Act support, do a lot of support of the economy right now, and some of those things without a renewal of something like that, those kinds of things, we may start to see some more deterioration of that. So going in, it's a big question mark. If you get down to the bottom section under the committed and unassigned fund balance section, again, most of those numbers are the same as what you've seen before. So we stand at about projected 32% of fund balance, so about 2.4% above the board policy of 25 to 30%. So any questions so far?
Mr. President?
Yes, Rob.
As it relates to the self-funded health fund balance, of course, March came, people stopped doing everything, including going to the doctor. Do you expect that to be upside down or be worse off next year?
Well, that's a good question. So, as we talked before about that, that additional 5.1 million that wasn't spent, a large portion of that, almost 2 million, or about 2 million of that was due to not taking it. The only appointments that were necessary were the absolutely necessary appointments, and delays and appointments and elective surgeries. So we saw a big drop in our claims, and so that was about $2 million. What we've seen going into the first couple of months is that's spiked up. I don't think in this budget we're anticipating that we're not going to touch the 1.9. We think we've got enough budgeted there right now to account for that. We didn't necessarily bring that down because we did anticipate that once things opened up, we would probably see a bigger than ordinary claims notice for the next few months. So right now we're tracking okay with that.
I just wanted to add on the comment you said about the possibility of a budget repair bill might be less, and I just had a conversation with Shannon Zimmerman, who's on the Joint Finance Committee and is also our assembly person for this district, and he shared in that. He said it highly unlikely we're going to see a budget repair bill between now and when our levy needs to be finalized, but after the election and after the dust settles, he didn't want to make any promises what could happen in the next two fiscal years, I guess the biennium that follows, and I took that as interpretation. We should better have our rainy day fund ready to go.
Yeah. I think that's good information to have, and good. I think we're positioned pretty well to be able to bridge those gaps in the next couple of years if we have to.
Is there a motion then to approve the proposed budget and levy?
So moved.
Second.
All right. Motion by Rob, second by Sue. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Moving on to modifications to the Certified Staff Handbook.
Andrew, do you want to take this one, or do
Sure.
you want me to take it?
I can certainly do it. So this is just the modification to increase the payout for personal days, unused personal days, from $75 to $250. So it's just the one modification.
And this goes with what we talked about at the last meeting, where we proposed to get it more in line with what it costs us for a sub in lieu of a personal day. And we know that keeping our building staffed is probably our biggest Achilles heel as we think about COVID and moving forward. So it just really what it does is it puts it in line with what our costs would be if they were to take that personal day versus sell it back to the district.
Clarification question, then this change to the handbook is expected to be 1 year only?
Well, at any point you can change it back. This could be 1 year only, or you can leave it the way it is. It's completely up to you guys.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, motion by Carrie, second by Sue. Any further questions regarding this one change to the handbook, which we had approved other changes previously? Yes. All right. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. It's passed. Next up is Title IX related policies. And Andrea, you're deferring to Aaron on that?
I can start it off.
Okay, very good.
So we had reviewed these at the last work session. There haven't been any changes except with the numbering since you saw them last. So just a reminder that this is required, adding the new Title IX policies and procedures. It also required us to make some adjustments to student policies and to employee policies. Just wanted to talk a little bit about how the Title IX works with we did a lot of work with our non-discrimination and our harassment policies and just how they kind of jive and work together. So really, when we get a complaint about anything, we really need to sit down and look at which avenue are we going to go with this. If it's harassment on the basis of sex, we're going to go with our Title IX policies. In talking this through with Shayna as well, the Supreme Court did uphold that gender nonconformity and transgender could fall within that category as well. If the harassment isn't on that basis, then we do have our harassment, bullying, and non-discrimination policies and procedures to fall back on too. So just wanted to clarify that.
All right.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Thank you for that clarification, Aaron. I really appreciate it. It was I wasn't sure how they, kind of merged or
No,
interplayed.
it's a good question. It's confusing for
Thank
sure. Mm-hmm.
And just as a reminder for, it's been 3 weeks since we had our work session on this, but you recall that these are changes that bring us into compliance with federal code and as well as the interlay with the state law. So these are mandatory changes, and because they need to go into effect, I need a motion to approve on first, waive the second reading and approve on first reading.
So moved.
All right.
Second.
All right. I think Heather moved for the approval. Bruce second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the Title IX related policies are approved. Next up, we have the strategic plan, which has been worked on for basically a full year with Studer, and we've had 2 presentations from Studer at our last work session. This one-page summary of the strategic plan was presented to the board and discussed. Is there further change from the last board meeting 3 weeks ago?
So I did highlight some changes we made. We got some feedback from different board members. So there are some changes in yellow. We did add the word non-discriminatory in the pillar our students. And then we did, on the 5th bullet down in that same column, we did add applying the lens of equity for all. And then also in the first bullet in the middle column, we did talk about trying to have a staff that is representative of the diversity of our student body across the district. So those are the only changes that have been made to this point. Otherwise, this is the same one that you saw at the work session. I know, just to kind of talk a little bit, a couple of things. I know Heather and I met. I talked to some of the other board members. Is with the strategic plan, if you remember, this was kind of an ongoing process. So about 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, the board kind of talked. We had a conversation about trying to get consistent data, measurement points, things like that, trying to be consistently reporting out. And kind of the response to that that we implemented 3 years ago was our district scorecard. And we had those, we worked on it as a leadership team and kind of came up with the different data points that we look at the whole district as a whole, and what those would be, and we'd be consistently measuring those data points. And then kind of that next step, so we kind of did this process a little bit juxtaposed or in reverse. But then the next conversation, I remember we had board members asking, we have HSD 2025, how do we have a more operational look at HSD 2025, what does that look like? And so then that's where really we started down this path of the strategic plan. And what we did with that is, to get to where we're at, we did kind of a crosswalk with HSD 2025, our Raider Way, our board guiding principles, as we looked at all those different components, and we kind of put all those different things together. We had focus groups representative of different groups in the community, teachers, students, staff, to kind of get feedback with Studer. And then this went through, I think, 5 edited drafts to kind of get to this point. And so then as we kind of unveiled, this strategic plan, I realized that, some of our mission, vision, value statements that are still in HSD 2025, as of right now, they kind of hold, but we probably are going to be looking at revising those. So it's kind of like doing this process a little bit in reverse than where we would typically do it, but still a doable process, and I think we're in a good spot so that what also comes from this is after this gets approved is then the building principals, department leaders will be working with our representatives from Studer directly to create what's called action plans around this, and then you'll be able to see the actual actionable steps that people will be taking around this. So the strategic plan itself is designed to be a little bit more 30,000 foot level, and then those action plans are really at a much closer level, and that's what you'll be getting and getting updates on as the year goes on.
Thank you for letting us know what the next steps are. And is there any discussion, or do we have a motion?
Just
Sue?
a comment. So I appreciate that you asked us at our August 24th meeting to please contact you if we had any input, and I know Heather did and I did. I don't know who else did. I hope others spoke with you. And I'm glad that we can be fluid enough here to consider the impact of numerous accomplishments this last year that we've achieved, especially in the area of our discussions on equity and race and so on. And so I'm glad they can be at least in some honorable way be recognized in the pillars. And and I know that way back when we were doing the Post-its on the wall, this also incorporates just some initial kind of fun engagement that we had. I remember that Bruce had a lot of fun doing that. And we came up with the, supporting an inclusive environment, and I was very impressed with us arriving at that. Thank you.
I will just say, we did add the word non-discriminatory in our pillar. I mean, because I think there's some discussion on what does inclusive mean. We want it to be inclusive. The only question we'd have would be, with this, do you want us to move that word or work it into more of one of the bullet points versus being up in the pillar? Just because a lot of times non-discriminatory is like the bar, like the lower bar set by the federal, and we want to go to a higher level than that. Do you know what I mean? Because it's one thing to not be discriminatory, it's another thing to be inclusive.
And I would just, because we did have a really good discussion about it in cabinet today, where we thought about, okay, what are we striving for with our pillars? And my only hesitancy, certainly supportive, inclusive learning environment where all students achieve. Totally impactful and meaningful. My concern, not concern, my wonder would be that the use of the word non-discriminatory. I don't know if we're striving, because we should just be that, right? Like we should be a non-discriminatory employment school district environment that that was I think one of our wonders during the conversation is there another way we can say something we're striving for instead of the legal compliance, which I would hope that we would definitely be in compliance with.
Are there any suggestions? Would equitable have that same connotation, or would that be more palatable?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you said, Carrie.
Equitable.
Carrie, that's the same word I was wondering about. To me, inclusive is even less aspirational than equitable. I mean, so I think, I like, the word equitable is down below in that new suggested language, but to me that feels more aspirational than non-discriminatory.
So if we were to work that in, versus the term non-discriminatory, would you be okay with that? Do you want us to bring it back? I think, do we have the gist of what that is? The only other thing I forgot to mention is, this was an older one. It's actually 2020, 2025 on the top. I know in the plan here it says 2019, 2024, just because we got kind of delayed about 6 months.
We'd all like to forget 2020, I think. But
yeah. So I know, Sue, you had one of the comments about non-discriminatory. What are your thoughts on that?
Actually, as you read that, it's really, it doesn't flow. Yeah. It's bad poetry.
Yeah. So, are you guys all right if
I think that I would trust the cabinet and so on to work on that. And as you were saying, what we are and what we're aspiring to, but just somehow work in this new consciousness and effort that
Absolutely.
we're reading a book, and we've all been to WASB and state conventions, and everything's about equity, and we're trying to understand that. So something that's a little bit, gives it some vitality and humanity.
Yeah, so if we go ahead and make that change, are you guys okay with us doing that then? And
Well, how about we do it in the form of a motion, then we could just do a motion to
Yep.
approve this strategic plan with that word non-discriminatory maybe being changed or deleted.
Yep. Okay.
Is there a motion?
I'll move that to find another way of expressing our aspirations in terms of equity and not necessarily use the actual word non-discriminatory.
Second.
Is that a motion for approval then?
Yes, I'm making that a motion.
All right.
Second.
All right. Motion by Sue, second by Bob. Any further discussion? Rob?
Yeah, Nick, thanks for the time today talking through this. But just to confirm, this wasn't driven just by the district. Working with Studer, this was, from a community standpoint, the community was heavily engaged.
Yep.
We offered opportunities for the community to participate. Can you briefly, really briefly, just talk to that community engagement, please, with this?
Yeah, so it's been over a year now since we did that. But yeah, we did get different stakeholder groups in the community. We sought out people. We invited them. We didn't just kind of put a shingle out and see who came. I mean, we actually sought people out. Gail met with the different focus groups over a couple days. It included, like I said, everything from students to staff to teaching staff, administrators. It also included members of our business community, members of our retired community, parents, just a variety of, I think she met with like 150 or 160 different folks over 2 days from trying to get all the different areas. So to make sure that there was lots of voice in the process.
All right. Any further questions or comments?
Mr. President, are we voting on just the use of non-discriminatory or the entire thing?
The entire thing. Yep.
Can I make one other comment?
Yeah, you can make a comment.
And the recruiting, retaining of the employees, the first highlighted point, where you say that representative of the diversity of our students, I think that's actually pretty limiting. It's a pretty homogeneous student body, I'm guessing. So maybe just representative of diversity.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely can do that. I mean, the big thing that most schools do strive for is to have their staff represent their student body, and we do have diversity, not just ethnic diversity, but we also have a variety of other different areas, and so that was kind of the thought process behind it, so that we made sure that our kids felt like that people that could relate to and things like that. So that was the rationale. But I mean,
I'm sorry, what was that point? I couldn't hear you.
The rationale was that our kids had adults that they could look up to, they'd see themselves in, they could relate to in that way. And so although we may be somewhat of a homogeneous staff as it relates to ethnic backgrounds or race, we actually are quite a diverse student body as it relates to other characteristics that we would have. And so that was kind of the thought process, but it was just, that's typically what we've tried to work for. If we can get to the levels, if we can have as diverse of staff as we have as diverse of student body, we'd actually be making huge strides.
Should we table this then and do another work session, or can we have a vote? I think we're going to call the question. Anybody, want to table this so we can wordsmith it some more in work session?
Mr. President, I guess,
Yes.
Point of clarification process will have you. Since there's a motion, it's been seconded, do we have to, the person who made the motion, take that off the table before we table it?
It's been proposed. The motion is pending.
Okay.
We'll have a vote, and if the question is called, otherwise we can talk about it more. We can adjourn this because we can talk about it more after the annual meeting.
May I make a comment?
Yes.
I would say we go ahead and vote and trust that the administration could wordsmith and we'll
Okay.
look at it again later.
All right, then all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. It's approved. Now, we've got one more agenda item, and it was put on at the request of, well, I requested, but Rob pointed out that we have a deadline, so we really need, he was asked to be on the committee for the resolutions, and it's the same resolution we've discussed before, except it's been updated, I think improved. All board members have an opportunity to read the proposals, but I'd go either way and defer to Rob. Do you think that we can go ahead and vote on this, or do you think that we should adjourn for the annual meeting and then take this up so we can discuss it into the night?
Whatever's most convenient for, for the board. I mean, we do have, if the board agrees to move this forward, it has to be postmarked tomorrow.
Yep. So that's why the urgency to get it done. Yes,
Yeah,
he just said it needs to be
tomorrow.
postmarked
Yeah.
tonight.
So this kind of got away from me with everything we had going on at the start of the school year. So again, we added some more clarity because that's some of the feedback that we had gotten last year. So the stuff in red is the additional descriptors, when we got feedback both from WASB and also from board members. And so I know it seems rushed. It does seem rushed. I totally get that, but we were kind of, this one is 100% my fault on this. I just lost track of it as we got ready to start the year and everything else going on. So if you're supportive of it, the intent has not changed from last year when you supported this.
Is there a motion one way or the other?
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and approved. Any further discussion? I think it's pretty self-explanatory, the changes, but go ahead.
Just one comment since we're moving on it now. I mean, I think all of the pluses of this are outlined pretty well in the motion. I do feel like I need to say, the minus or the argument against it would be that sales taxes are regressive, right? And so they impact low-income people the most because everybody gets a penny, but that has a harder hit on low-income people. So I think to put that out there, the pluses and the minuses, the pluses are very strong. But just to be transparent about that is an argument against this, is that it is a regressive tax.
Mr. President?
Yes. Right.
Just, I guess to tag on, or not tag on to, but to comment on Heather's, statement. The idea is from a resolution standpoint, is to keep this loose. Certainly if we're fortunate enough and this is passed by the delegate assembly, ultimately it would go to the state and our lobbyists would pursue it. And at that point, it can take up any form to alleviate some of that regressive tax standpoint. So for instance, sales tax as it relates to certain groceries, certain clothing items, those things might not be impacted by this, but it's up to them to debate. The idea is just to hopefully find support for our schools, school districts throughout the state, so they have other funding options and at the same time provide property tax relief. I don't know if that helps or not, but the idea is not to worry about the regressiveness of this tonight. Let our legislators handle that.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the resolution say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it, and it's approved. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We stand adjourned. The annual meeting will begin at 7 o'clock.